Hi everyone, happy Friday morning, and you'll have to excuse my absence. I know it's been a long time since I have made a video. I think the last one was well over a month ago. And to be honest, COVID fatigue is a thing, and I think you guys know that as well as I do. Work and life just got a lot more busy, and it was difficult for me to find the energy to put forth another video. But particularly in this last week, again, so many of you have continued to share with me how helpful my videos have been. And so I couldn't help but to muster up a little bit more energy and serve you once again. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID and a lot about distance learning, because I know that many of our children have either recently started distance learning or are about to next week. So after 2 months of what we now call crisis learning in March through May, and perhaps little to no learning in June and July, this is no joke for us, both for us as parents as well as our children. And I wanted to offer a little bit of guidance to you as parents and caregivers about how to make this more of an effective time for you and your student, as well as maybe even an enjoyable time. And first of all, I think it might be helpful to understand what we know and what we don't know about kids and contagiousness when it comes to COVID-19, which may help you in moments of frustration as you are serving as your child's in-home teacher. And I think that most of us can agree that in-person school is where we ultimately want our kids to be, ideally where they should be, especially if it was not for the current situation at hand. But life has handed us what feels like a bunch of rotten lemons this year, and in order to make the best of it, I'm hoping that a little bit of extra information will help you. So number one, what is the risk to our kids when it comes to coronavirus? Well, fortunately, that's not very high. About 90% of our children will develop mild or moderate symptoms, and this can vary anywhere from a slight fever, congestion, rash. We've even seen our kids lose their sense of smell, as you have seen in adults as well. But in general, they are not too severely impacted, but as of the first week of August, 90 children in the U.S. have died. Now, that doesn't really compare to the 170,000 adults who have died, but again, it's important to know that our kids are not immune from this. And of course, there is that syndrome, which we call MIS-C, or multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children. As of right now, we have about 570 cases reported throughout the U.S. with 10 deaths. And there was actually one 16-year-old boy here in Kern County who had it as well, and fortunately is recovering well. But I want you to understand that while our kids do become far less sick than the adult counterparts, they are not immune to this virus by any means. And number two, let's talk about how contagious are kids, because I think that's the question people really are interested in. And you may have heard a study out of South Korea where almost 65,000 people, both infected as well as those who are contact traced from the infected individuals, showed that children under the age of 10 are not a significant source of spread. But it should be noticed, and this is actually something that I missed the first time that I read this as well, that there were only 30 kids that were infected that were under the age of 10. And out of the 60,000 contacts who were traced in the study, only 237 of them were under the age of 10. Well, why is that? At the time of the study, kids were not out and about in South Korea the way they would be if this pandemic was not being dealt with, very similar to what we're dealing with in the US. Our schools, our sports, kids' extracurricular activities, parks, recreation facilities, birthday parties, all of them have been limited, changed, or shut down for quite some time. But in these last 4 weeks, as certain schools have started to open up or sports have started to open up, COVID fatigue has set in and gatherings are starting to get larger. The number of children affected or infected in the U.S. has actually gone up by 90% in the last 4 weeks. And there are now over 380,000 children who have had COVID-19. And this was reported before most of those schools have opened up. As you can see here, a lot of our schools haven't even opened up. And then, of course, there was another study that came out after that that looked at the amount of the virus in children's noses, those children particularly who had been infected. And it found that there's more virus in those young children than there is in adults. So the question really remains, what kind of spreaders are children going to be when they're put back in schools? Will they be high level of spreaders like they are of typical colds and flus? Or is there something about their systems and the fact that they don't tend to very often develop severe disease that's going to prevent them from spreading the virus? Well, honestly, we just don't know. And I know this is something that we want an answer to and we want it to be rushed, but unfortunately, research, as you have seen, is painstakingly slow, often contradictory, and it takes a long time to get answers. And yes, we can look at other countries and see what great success some of them have had when putting their kids back into schools. But we have to remember that many other countries opened their schools when their caseload was not nearly as high as what we are currently experiencing. And we can look at schools in the US who have opened. And for example, there was a school in Dallas, Texas, where they almost immediately had to close down. I don't know if it was on the first day or the second day, because 6 students and 3 faculty were infected. And in Woodstock, Georgia, there were 14 positive cases in the first week of school. So both of those schools ended up having to be shut down for a different duration of time after that. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. Opening schools is going to be very difficult, but keeping them open is going to be even more difficult. And we know that opening schools will result in some spread, and in essence, that's okay. You know, I would love to get our numbers down to 0, but I know that that is not realistic, and that we have to prioritize. But the chance of schools staying open when we're having 200 plus cases every day is really where the problem lies. And the only way for schools to not really get inundated with cases is for our caseload in the community to come down. And to what point does it have to come down? Well, some experts have said we need to have less than 20 cases per 100,000 population. And others have said that we need to have a positivity rate of less than 10%. And some say we need to have a declining caseload every day for 14 consecutive days. And unfortunately, we have not met those requirements here in Kern County for 14 consecutive days. The other problem is that we don't have adequate testing and reporting, which quite honestly makes this impossible to manage. We shouldn't have to wait 2 to 3 to 4 days to get a test and then 7 to 10 days to get the result back. I personally can't remember what I did 5 days ago. If you ask me to then contact trace back to 14 days ago, I have no idea who I talked to. So how can I even tell those people to then be careful? And again, I know that you guys probably feel similarly frustrated that we don't have reliable reporting with our numbers. And this is because of backlogs in testing. Sometimes there's double counting because you have a person who is positive and then they need to have a test of clearance to go back to work, but they're still positive. There's a huge number of lists that goes on and on. And we have got to get these types of issues under control if we want our kids to be back in school and we want them to stay there for more than all of a week. Because like I said, it's going to be a big effort on the part of schools as well as for us as parents to get them back in schools. And how devastating would it be that within 3, 5, 7 days we have to shut it all back down again? That's not realistic and it's not fair to our kids either. And then, of course, we have to remember that our schools are not run by our kids alone, right? The teachers, the administrators, the staff are all vital components of school, and they have to be considered as well. And one recent analysis actually showed that 25% of teachers in the United States are at higher risk for a COVID-19 illness because of a pre-existing condition or because of their age. And that's a serious percentage that we have to take into consideration before we just open up willy-nilly. And so again, you know, we can't throw them back into school without better numbers, without better testing, without a better cohesiveness and a stalwart commitment to social distancing and masking. And I honestly do think that we are getting better, and I think that things are starting to pivot and change, but we are just not quite there yet. So as we continue to work on those things, here we are with distance learning. And I know that it is far from ideal for you as a parent and for your child. But honestly, there is a part of me that feels so blessed to be surrounded by so many dedicated individuals who are trying as best as they possibly can to make this work. And that includes you as a parent. So I have a few tips for you to just see if we can make this work to the best of our abilities. First and foremost, and really above all else, please do not expect perfection, either from yourself or your children or your child's school or their teachers. Realize that some days are honestly going to be a train wreck, and probably more so in the beginning, and that is okay. Whether it's the internet, your kid's attitude, the work itself, there is so much that may be working against you. But if you set out every single day to just simply do the best you can and put the day to rest, knowing that you've done the best you can, then you've done your job, plain and simple. We're not expecting miracles to happen during this time. We're just trying to keep them functional. And this is an alternative to in-person school. And one day, I hope sooner than later, our kids will go back to in-person school and normal learning will resume. And this may be as early as October, November. It could be as late as next spring. But our job is to help our kids to keep using that muscle that is their brain and not lose our wits about us as we do that. And please, parents, don't compare yourself to what other parents are doing, what other children are doing, how they're performing, what's happening on social media. Put your blinders on, focus on yourselves and your children and your family, and go from there. Quite honestly, nothing else matters. And ask for help if you need it, whether it's in the form of a tutor, it's a family friend or family member to help cover you for an hour here and there, whether it's asking for help from your child's teacher or even other parents in the classroom that you have befriended. This is the time for us to work together, not to further spread ourselves apart. So, number 2, in terms of routine, the school day starts the night before. It really does. Have your big kids put their phones down 30 minutes before bed. And I know this is a difficult task to request. Stick to a bedtime. Pretend like this is regular school and they actually have to be out of the house. Wake up, get ready, eat breakfast. Make sure that your kids are not overloading on sugar in the morning. Don't use Pop-Tarts every single day. I know that cereal is sometimes taboo, but quite honestly, I would rather your child have Rice Krispies and half a banana than Pop-Tarts or waffles loaded down with syrup so that they're super hyper and they find it difficult to sit in their chair, because we know that recess at home is not nearly as good as recess at school, and you don't want them to have all of that extra sugar high and energy running around if they don't need it. Routine is so crucial to our brain's optimal learning, and having this routine is going to make it better for your child and easier for you, even though I know it's tough to stick to a routine sometimes. Number 3, have a workspace for your child. There is a reason as adults that we have desks and offices. Our brains actually function differently in different environments. And the more consistent you are with a learning space for your child, again, the easier it is for their brains to go into listening and learning mode. And honestly, it doesn't have to be anything fancy or expensive. A table and a chair in a certain room in the house is completely fine. But try to avoid having your child sitting on their bed, sitting on the sofa, sitting on a lounge chair in the backyard. You want to make it as much like school as you possibly can. Number 4, be sure to build in breaks. From what I understand, a lot of teachers will be doing, shorter sessions of teaching, and then there will be breaks in between. To me, I think you should try to avoid having your child finish up the schoolwork in those small breaks so that there's less homework at the end of the day. I think they've got to get up and get their wiggles out. Know that recess and those 7-minute breaks for older kids in between classes are there for a reason, and we should operate in the same way. Whether you have your kids get outside just for a quick walk, or you keep them inside because it's crazy hot and the air quality is poor, and you play tag, or you have a dance party, or you do musical chairs. It doesn't matter, but you've got to get their bodies moving in between those lessons. It's so, so important. And number 5, in terms of getting moving and getting outside, there's a second component to this. I've had so many families in my own practice who have told me they're literally not going outside, like just doing the bare minimum. And I know that between the heat and the fires and the air quality, the mosquitoes and COVID, going outside is not a very attractive option. But once again, it's so important for our brains and our bodies to see and feel daylight. A short amount of time, especially over the long haul, is going to be important to our sleep, to our physical health, to our emotional and mental health, and we've got to get outside and move our bodies a little bit. So whenever, however you can find it, please try to incorporate that into your schedules, both as adults as well as for your kids and your family. So number 6 is screen time. And I know you guys are going to hate me for this one because even as a pediatrician, parents have told me we have completely slacked on screen time. We have very few rules about it. And initially I was saying, it's okay. I understand. I'm right there with you. Our rules about screen time have slipped as well. But I'm going to go ahead and say it, and it's now time to reel those rules back in. We need to limit our kids' screen time. And obviously they're going to have quite a bit through school, and that's why what's happening after school is really important. And I'm going to tell you, under the age of about 10 to 12, I think that our kids should not have any more screen time after school. Unless it's related to their homework and they absolutely have to do it. But in terms of quote unquote the fun screen time, I think we've got to pull it back in. And I know that's hard to say, but we've got to get them playing, whether it's with their toys, whether it's outside if that permits, just doing something other than having your face and your eyes in a screen for more than the number of hours that they are already doing so. For your older kids, find a common ground with them, something that also feels feasible to them, because if you tell them no screen after school, you guys are going to have a huge argument and it's not going to work. Maybe ask them, let's say for an hour after the school day is over at 3 p.m. that you put your phone away, and that you get 30-minute breaks throughout the rest of the late afternoon and evening, but then we put it down for 30 minutes in between. Because again, it's just not good for our brains to be on our phones as much as we currently are right now. And I am as much of a culprit as you guys are. Please don't feel like I am preaching to you. I am definitely part of the crowd on this one. Make sure that there's no screens at meal times for any of you guys. Use this as a time to look up and look at each other and talk to one another. Number 7 is flexibility. If something that you do in your child's school day works well, wonderful, stick with it. If it was a train wreck and it was awful and you hated it and they hated it, don't be afraid to change it. If you need to move the room in your house where your child works, go ahead and do that. If you need to make breaks longer or shorter, you need to change when they're going to bed, you need to change what they're eating, it's okay to change things up and be flexible. What you start with does not have to be what you finish with. And be willing to pivot. You're going to see your teachers pivot a lot. They're going to change things up from how it is on the first day of school to how it is a week later and 3 weeks later. They're trying to make it better for you, and just be willing to pivot with them. Now, last but not least, this is really important because, again, this is something that I think I've seen so much of, and I know my colleagues have as well. Please pay attention to not only your own mental health, but your child and your teen's mental health right now. Depression and anxiety have been such a big problem for adults, and I think that's been recognized to an extent through all of this, but I don't know that people are appreciating that it happens in children as well. And it can look very different in kids as opposed to in adults. You might see changes in mood as you would expect, but there's also going to be different things that kids can do. You may see a change in their appetite. Some may actually eat more because they're looking for comfort eating, and others might start restricting calories because they need a way to feel like they're in control of something. You may see changes in their sleep. You may see inabilities to concentrate. You may see just lack of interest in anything. You may see more tantrums. And I know a lot of that is probably just part of COVID, and you've been dealing with that, and it's hard to differentiate. Is there really a problem to is there not? And that's where we come in to help you. But if it's starting to not settle well with you as a parent, that you really see your child becoming a different person than... Sorry, my phone rang. It was the hospital calling me, so I've got to finish up quickly. But please don't hesitate to reach out to someone who can help you. This is a trying time for them as well as it is for us. And there are both in-person as well as online resources if you need it. Be sure that you err on the side of caution, as I mentioned. I often tell my parents in clinic, there is no harm in meeting with a therapist. Either you find that you don't need it and you're actually doing pretty well, or you find that you do. But then you go from there and you've learned something in the process. So that is all I have for you right now. I am rooting for all of you guys and your kids as you take on this new adventure in 2020. I am going to come back to you and talk a little bit more about COVID, the frustrations that we are all feeling, because it feels like we are very stuck in where we're at. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? What can we continue to do? So that will be hopefully next week. All right, you guys, take care. Have a wonderful weekend. Please stay safe in this heat and this air quality. If you have asthma, please be cautious and stay inside. All right, you guys, take care.